what's happening? I'd like you to meet Tommy McGuire and Miss Combo.
Hello, and welcome to the Stateside Madness podcast, the one and only podcast of the official Madness American fan service. I'm Lori, along with my co-host Polly, here to bring you news, reviews, and deep dives into the nutty sound of the British pop band Madness.
The original gangster, Scarface, Al Capone, C-A-P-O-N-E, Capone. Wobble your sound system, madness. Hear this, Kawa. This one, your Chris.
Hello, and welcome to the Stateside Madness podcast. I'm Lori.
And I'm Polly. And today we're going to bring you a very special episode. This is episode 28, and it's a tribute to Prince Buster. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but as is our like, we're going to start out with the communicator. Okay, so first up on the communicator, we got communication. Short while ago, a listener in Holland, Andre Claus, writes, "You start the show by saying it's for Americans. I'm from Holland and I love it too. Wouldn't it be better to say for Madness fans all around the globe?" You know, making it a little bit more all-inclusive. And Laura and I have talked about that, and I suppose we could start doing that, and it's because it's right. It is, in fact, listened to by folks all around the globe, which we're thankful for. And, you know, I suppose it's because maybe when we started this whole thing, like Stateside Madness, the fan service, you know, we presume maybe it would only be Americans that would be paying any sort of attention to us. So good on you, Andre. You pointed out something pretty important. And I think we are going to start doing that.
Okay, so the big news this week, Lee Scratch Perry has passed away. So he was a legendary dub and reggae innovator. He's died at the age of 85 while staying at the Noel Holmes Hospital in the Jamaican town of Lucia. A cause of death has yet to be disclosed. And obviously, this is sending ripples throughout the Madness community. Chrissy Boy wrote on Twitter, "Lee Scratch Perry, lightning bolt heart, multiple musical notes. Thank you for the music and inspiration. I bought The Vampire in 1969. Pensive face."
Louis Alphonso from Bad Manners will be joining us for parts of this episode as well. And at the news of Lee Scratch Perry's passing, he had a little story he also wanted to pass along. So let's take a listen.
Of course, he's, to me, the greatest two Jamaican artists, himself and Lee Perry. And in fact, apparently, he saved Lee Perry's life very early before either of them had started recording. He saved Lee Perry's life. So even before he'd started making music, he'd given reggae its greatest start because he was a boxer, wasn't he? And his first job was looking after Coxswain's sound system. And Lee Perry was working on as a kind of sound engineer and assistant DJ. He got into some trouble, and Buster used his pugilistic skills to get him out of that trouble and saved Jamaica from not having Lee Perry.
Other news, MIS has announced that Madness will make an appearance at the homecoming concert for the Team Great Britain Paralympians at Wembley Arena on September 12th. Very nice of them to do. Congratulations to all the Paralympians.
And up next on the communicator, it would appear that The Madness and Mad Not Mad are both going to be re-released on 180-gram vinyl. And it looks like those are going to land on October 29th.
I was particularly surprised to see The Madness is being released because that's kind of the hard one that nobody can ever find. So maybe it's starting to finally get its due. I wonder if we're going to start to see soon the missing CD, because you know how with the Madness CD collection, they all have letters on the spine, MADNES, and there's like a missing one where The Madness would have been. So I wonder if that's going to be the next step. I'm just speculating, but that would be awesome if it was.
That it would. And also, sad news affecting the Madness fan community. We've just heard that Nick Chesney has passed away unexpectedly. Now, I don't know Nick aside from just seeing him posting at different Madness-related fan websites, but you know, it's sad nonetheless to know that there's another member of the community that has left us. So all the best to his family and friends, and just know that us folks on the other side of the pond are thinking about you. Be well.
Yeah, Nick and I used to be Facebook friends, and he was a very good guy. So my condolences to his family and to the Madness community. I mean, he was really well known in the Madness community. So that's a sad loss.
Earthquake, child, earthquake, shaking Orange Street. This music with a beat. Sure. Let go. Because you're tired. You want pop. Look how your face look like one of them old GOS boss. You're not hearing your spear and your front wheel puncture. You see, Orange Street is the music street. And that's the street that sells the beat. So when you see me come, don't run. Cause I'm just about to have some fun. Man, let me help you in something you don't know right now. See ya. The Prince comes out in Orange Street. And the beat starts to...
Today's episode is a tribute to Prince Buster as we approach the 5th anniversary of his death this coming September 8th. Now, Prince Buster was extremely influential on our boys. Their first single was actually a tribute to him, The Prince. A number of their songs from their very early days were actually Prince Buster covers. So we thought it would be important to acknowledge this 5-year anniversary. So in this episode, we'll do the traditional things like throwing a few facts out there and talk about his songs. But given how key he was to Jamaican music and his influence on the British ska scene, he seemed too important for just the standard retrospective.
Yeah, that's true. And that's also why we thought it'd be good to reach out to a few people either connected with or influenced by Prince Buster. But we'll hear from those folks a little bit later in the episode.
Okay, so who was Prince Buster? Well, he was born May 24th, 1938 in Kingston, Jamaica. His birth name was Cecil Bustamante Campbell. The middle name Bustamante being a tribute to William Alexander Clark Bustamante, Jamaica's first post-independence prime minister. While living with his grandmother, she bestowed the nickname Busta on him, which he would then change to Buster for use in his stage name. The Prince got his first taste of musical performance singing in church choirs, and during his school years, where he performed with the Frankie Lyman's Song and Dance Troupe.
Come on and let me love you, little honey. The loving that you never so grand. I don't know why you call me funny, honey. I know I gave you lots of good money, but I'll be true. No one but you. It's not a good thing, little honey. No sleep was not for me. Was love really meant for me, honey? Or was it never to be? But I'll be true. No one but you.
So that was just a little bit of the song Little Honey. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, in the 1950s, there was nothing bigger on the Jamaican cultural scene than the sound system. We've talked about that a little bit before in the past on some previous episodes. The sound system was local DJs traveling from venue to venue, and pretty much their job is just putting out the hits. There's no bigger sound system than Tom the Great Sebastian, whom Prince Buster credits with introducing him to the American R&B and the New Orleans sound that would seed Prince Buster's and Ska's musical family tree. Also around this time, Prince Buster would be introduced to Clemente Coxsone Dodd. Now, Coxsone was a guy with a lot of irons in the fire, not uncommon in the economically unstable Jamaica. People just did what it took to make money. Coxsone was connected, motivated, and become a mentor to Prince Buster. I could go on, but I know someone with some insider knowledge on Coxsone, Prince Buster, and the roots of ska. Let's welcome Sultan Ali, the son of Prince Buster.
Thanks for having me. First, I must greet you with a salam and a greetings to all my friends and families around the world. The Buster legacy continues. Again, Ska, thanks for having me. Like you said in the song, if you listen to the song Earthquake, when he was teasing Coxsone, he said, my father was born May 24th, 1938, a place called Victoria Jubilee, Lion Hill. And that was about less than half a quarter block, I should say, because Jamaica streets are so small, like England, like the States, the blocks are wide. And if you walk across North Street, you go back to 145 and a half Orange Street. After he left the maternity ward, that's where my father resided, 145 and a half Orange Street. So you always figure that that street was his kingdom. And Duke, Creed, and Coxsone, they didn't come from there. It was from the rural part. Buster was born in the urban inner city of West Kingston. But before that, he had 3 record stores at the rear at Luke Lane on Charles Street, right across from the great Tom the Great Sebastian, which is a very, very important man in the career and the life of Prince Buster. He was one who introduced Prince Buster to a whole bunch of rhythm and blues because he was a part of the sound system, Tom the Great Sebastian sound system. So the music that Tom the Great Sebastian was playing was very, very influential. Even though there was rhythm and blues, but then Buster tried to get a visa to go to the States to buy out record like Coxsone Duke to stay ahead of the whole game, and he was denied. And he said, Buster, your hands are too soft to cut sugar cane. And he was turned down. So necessity is the mother of invention. So he had to go to a man called Drum Bego, who played in the weekend in the supper club. And he became the master drummer. If you listen to the song 10 Commandments, the intro, that's the great Drum Bego, Arkland Parks. And he decides to listen, I'm trying to get to the States, but I'm being turned down. We got to create something Jamaican. Because he always had this national view, this pride, you see, this patriotic zeal he had, and not just about money. So because of him, Jamaica has a sound. Because Coxsone and Duke, they were copying the rhythm and blues. They were making money rhythm and blues. And the saying, the cliche goes, if it don't break, don't fix it.
So Sultan, tough question. What's your favorite Prince Buster song?
Well, wow, great question. I love all of them. All of them is my favorite. but the one that's more endearing to my heart, the one that's most touching, if I could find the adjective or the superlative to describe it, would definitely be, beyond the shadow of a doubt, would be Danny, Dane, and Lorraine. And I love that song, the chord structure, the melody. And we've got, my father had one of the greatest alto player playing on it solo, the Jamaican Charlie Parker, the great Lester Sterling from the Scatterlights playing that solo, Charlie Organier, another legend, playing that harmonica.
Danny, Dane, and Lorraine. Danny, Dane, and Lorraine. These are three people in my life, and their mother will be my wife. Danny, Dane, and Lorraine. I hope someday they're lucky.
Prince Buster came to prominence in the early 1960s, producing for small acts and recording his own music, mostly on the UK label Blue Beat. His first release being Little Honey, which we heard a little earlier. It was recorded in 1961 as Buster's Group, featuring himself, Ja Jerry, Drumbago, and Rico Rodriguez. By 1962, Prince Buster would mostly record under his own name, though often with a host of Jamaican heavy hitters. In the first 5 years of the decade, he would amass dozens of singles and release albums at a rate greater than one per year. This period would produce many classics such as Al Capone, 10 Commandments of Man, One Step Beyond, and this one, Madness.
Madness, madness, they call it madness. Madness, madness, they call it madness. It's plain to see, that is what they mean to me. Madness, madness, I call it gladness.
All right, Lori, so we just listened to Madness. Now that's one you're kind of familiar with. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, as Madness fans know, that's the song that they took their name from. It's interesting to me. I'd actually never heard the original version before, and it's definitely a little bit slower, I think, than the version that we're accustomed to.
Yeah, a little bit. And the arrangement is different, and we just might hear a little bit about that later. Moving on with the Prince Buster story. So the last half of the 1960s saw Prince Buster continue to pump out great music. Though gradually his style shifted, some might say only slightly, from the thumping ska stylings to the slower, sensual, rock-steady beat. This period produced the hits Judge Dredd, Ghost Dance, Take It Easy, and these two, Wine and Grind and Rough Rider.
Whether you whine or grind, whether you whine or grind, she shake it up right on time. She shake it up right on time. She like it long, she like it strong. Ram her hard and you can't go wrong. Whether you whine or grind.
So we just listened to Wine and Grind and Rough Rider. Now, people will notice that those are the two songs covered by the English beat, and they had hits with them, and good on them because they're fantastic songs.
So by this time, in the late 60s, Prince Buster had become familiar with Muhammad Ali and had converted to Islam. I think we should go back to Prince Buster's son, Sultan Ali, and let him explain.
My father was always conscious, trying to understand the plight of his people. Why are we at the bottom? Why are we economically, socially, and politically void? There are a lot of questions. And when you got questions, you got to find solutions. Because they tell you, go to school, work hard, get a good education. But at the end result, economically, socially, and politically, you're not there. Something is wrong. So by his quest of searching, finding himself, trying to make a livelihood, knowing about Marcus Garvey and all these great teachers and everything, it evolved him. He was into the boxing thing. He was also a pugilist. He used to bodyguard and protect Coxon from Drew Creed and everything. So he visited England back in the early 60s with Mr. Derek Morgan, which was his counterpart, nemesis, if you will. And after rehearsal or some meet with Blue Beat, Mr. Shalit, they were walking around and they just bump into the training session where Muhammad Ali, at that time was Cassius Clay, was in the UK. My father looked just like Ali, just like he's about maybe 6 or 7 inches shorter. I mean, it's like a law of attraction, because what Ali was doing in America, Prince Buster was doing in Jamaica. So they struck up a friendship. My father was also a boxer and everything. And then he was like a law of attraction, and he was impressed. Both of them was impressed with each other. Then he invited him to meet the teacher, Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And like I said, the rest was history. And now I wear the name Ali.
Also in the latter half of the 1960s is when we find a lot of our familiar friends coming of age, listening to the radio and discovering ska. Let's let them speak about first hearing Prince Buster.
Al Capone guns don't argue.
In 1964, I was like 8, which is when Al Capone came out. But I don't know, maybe in England, it probably came out then. I don't know when it was a hit in England. I have to look that up. It may have been when I was 10 or 11. But I remember that, and it was quite interesting song, at the time, and that kind of music. Because we had in England, we had sort of ska and reggae, it was around quite a lot. But that was kind of different. And also, I remember the 10 Commandments. But that was about it, that was about it. Until, many years later, Madness started. And I think it was Suggs. Suggs and Lee really liked Prince Buster. And we learned Madness. And then the B side of One Step of is it Al Capone? He's One Step Beyond. And as you know, we did that because it was kind of nobody had heard of that song. That was, and he was like, in the sort of 80s, when we started, or 79, I went and bought some of his records. I really like them, I really like that Fabulous Greatest Hits one. Ghost Dance, all those songs, really good.
I must have been 7 or 8 years old. And I heard, like most English people, I heard this weird sound on the radio. And I thought, what the hell is that? And but it was so different from everything else. I think it was on my mother's blue radio that I heard it. I can't remember what kind of, and it just sounded something which is just completely, utterly different from everything I'd ever heard. The One Step Beyond song is just a fantastic piece of Roland Alphonso saxophone, which is very beautiful. And just to finish on that, Roland himself, when I asked him who wrote that, because it's written down as Campbell, you know, it's written down as Cecil Campbell, but I asked him, and he said, "Oh, I don't know." And I said, "Well, you wrote it, didn't you?" And he said, "Oh, you know, it wouldn't have been famous. Like Roland Alphonso is the nicest guy you would ever meet." He said, "Well, it probably wouldn't have been famous without Prince Buster doing that, just saying those 3 words." So I like that. That's I'll go back to One Step Beyond. I think that's the one I like the most.
One step beyond.
So in that last segment, we just heard from fan of the show and Madness guitarist Chrissy Boy. We also heard from Louis Alphonso. He is, of course, the guitarist from Bad Manners.
Right. And so, of course, Madness fans are going to recognize that last song that we played, One Step Beyond. And you can really see how ska began to become integrated into UK culture, at least as far as the youth were concerned. Now, this is perhaps the crux of what we're talking about today, Prince Buster, and why his work resonated so much with our favorite groups from our youth, like Madness, and the others from the two-tone ska era. As such, a lot of our guests have a lot to say about it. Let's start with Stephen Shafer, who's the author of the blog and book, The Duff Guide to Ska.
So it was probably, just a year or two later. Funnily enough, my younger brother was actually always definitely more ahead of the curve on, with all kinds of music than I was. So it may even been that he had picked up like a sampler, of older Jamaican music, and I probably heard it off of that. And I think I became much more. It was interesting. So I was exposed, to the two-tone stuff, really sort of just after two-tone, was over. But the beat were still good, English beat were still popular here in the US, and sort of there was still interest in that, and even that sort of was like going back and figuring out everything, and the Selector, and all these great bands.
That's an interesting question. I guess I can't answer for all of the youth, but for me, for my friends, it was not something you could hear on the radio. Not even on the radio you could hear like pop, and great things like T-Rex and so on, and you could hear like on radio, on the late night shows or Radio Caroline, you could hear things like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and stuff like that, which is a kind of a little bit more risque, if you like, but you couldn't really hear it on the radio. It was very, very rare. There were, I mentioned that I did hear Prince Buster with Al Capone and One Step Beyond was on was a hit single in England, and so you heard it on Radio 1, but I think there were about 5 or 6 of them, of ska singles which were famous, and it was really underground. You could hear Velvet Underground, you could hear them on John Peel's show or something like that, but you couldn't hear John Peel didn't play ska. It was something that you could only hear if you had a friend who had records, or if you went down to the club or something like that, it was really, really underground. And it was very, very exciting and something completely different, which you wouldn't have heard elsewhere. That your parents really didn't like it. They really didn't. My parents like jazz and all that kind of thing, and I was trying to convince them that Roland Alphonso is the greatest jazz player since Stan Getz, you know, and but they weren't having it. I still think that is actually true.
Well, so Roland is no doubt a huge influence on you too.
Yeah,
I take it.
That's where I took my stage name from. Yeah, I was lucky to play with him later on stage and meet him and talk to him a lot as well. And he's very relevant to the Prince Buster story. He played, you know, One Step Beyond, and Al Capone. That was him. You know, it was probably more his compositions than Buster's.
I don't know. You know, I mean, you know, a lot of those records or sort of reggae, but you know, they were just good. They were good, you know, they had some kind of good tune, good rhythm. You know, and they were quite interesting, obviously, because some of them were sung in such an accent you didn't quite know what they were saying, you know. You know, so if you had some black friends, they might explain, you know. Sometimes it's just the accent, but then sometimes it's kind of like slang words, you know. Like Uptown Top Ranking, you know, it's got kind of a lot of slang type things. You know, wind up my waist. He's like, yeah, women in my council flats told me, Agnes, you know, it's a way of dancing suggestively. But, you know, I don't know, it was just kind of like a part of everything, you know, part of British culture, you know, a lot of Jamaican people in England. And yeah, the music kind of came with them, I suppose, you know. It probably is Ghost Dance, you know. Something about, you know, it's got a really good little rhythm, nice little solo. Yeah, that's my favourite song, Ghost Dance.
Ghost Dance. Dear Ketos, my friend, good day. Hoping you are keeping the best of health. How is the music down there in Boneyard? I hear that Busby have a sound system, and that Naya Keith is the disc jockey. But them can't get no red stripe beer for selling a dance at night. Tell Zaki, the high priest, who used to lead the toughest, one who could go.
So we just heard from Stephen Shafer, Louis Alphonso, and Chrissy Boy Foreman. And that was the song Ghost Dance by Prince Buster. Now, time rolls on. And the Prince continues to produce, record, tour, even appear in a few TV shows, documentaries, and movies. Most notably as a DJ in Jimmy Cliff's The Harder They Come. His recording schedule slows down, and by 1973, he's effectively retired from music and living in Miami. But by the end of the 70s, his music has taken hold across the pond, and his influence was showing on our favorite bands.
That's right. And we've got a few folks ready to give us some insight into just how that happened. Leading off again is Stephen Shafer.
You know, you had, you know, large groups of people from Pakistan and India come to England, you know, from South Asia, and then you had, you know, a huge number of people came in from Jamaica. That generation of people that moved from Jamaica to England in the 50s called the Windrush generation, and that was named after one of the steamliners that would bring people from Jamaica to England. You know, so you had that first generation of people who, you know, moved into, you know, the working class neighborhoods. So you had the Jamaican working class people move right in next door to the white English working class people. And then you had their kids grew up together and went to the same schools and hung out in the same neighborhoods. And of course, the Jamaicans brought, you know, their culture with them and their music with them. And, you know, when ska music started and, you know, when it evolved into rocksteady and into reggae, Obviously all that music came in too, and it not only was appreciated by the Jamaicans who had immigrated to England, but it seeped out. It seeped out into the greater, broader neighborhood. And since it was, in most places, it was integrated, and it was much more common, in the 60s in England for people to grow up in very, racially integrated neighborhoods there than it was here. I mean, it was stark contrast. So you had the two-tone generation of musicians grew up listening to all of that, to all that music, and particularly in the late 60s, early 70s, you had all those amazing skinhead reggae.
The first song we played was ska, and we were playing ska not a long time before the other bands, but it was 76 we started playing. I think Madness and Special started 78, 79, but they were known before we were. The Selector and the Specials knew each other, and they had connections through Coventry. But yes, it was a kind of thing that was going on all over Britain, the beat as well, in Birmingham. And it's funny. I've always wondered about that. Why was it London, Coventry, Birmingham? Those are the places where the bands came from. Nowhere else. Usually Manchester and Liverpool. There's a big movement there. But I guess it's just maybe there's a big something to do with the West Indian community in those cities. A lot of us came because we went to school with a lot of West Indians in our school, so we heard the music there, and that's where we started playing it with our friends at school. So I guess that was the same for the Specials and for the beat in Birmingham. Well, I mean, you have to make it happen as well, and that's the hats off to Jerry Dammers and the who started the two-tone movement. There had previously been British reggae with Steel Pulse and Black Slate, and Black Slate who went to our school. But to actually have the mixed race music kind of thing, that was really a very big piece of work, which was done by Jerry Dammers and Pauline Black from the Specials and the Selector. Things don't happen just like that. There are other movements which probably didn't happen. But you have to have somebody who actually has to go and make it happen. Personally, as I said, I'm a very, very big Prince Buster fan, and always was. I think his style of delivery of the English language is something which I tried to impress on Buster, our Buster, Buster Blood Vessel. It's probably no coincidence that his name is that either. The way that he speaks English as a kind of West Indian kind of way of speaking it, but I think he was one of the first people to actually use his own real dialect. When I worked with Prince Buster, I found that he wasn't a very impressive character, but the thing which impressed me about him was that when he spoke, it was like listening to his records. The Prince Buster you hear is himself. That's his real accent. And previous to that, in West Indian music, there was a kind of a West Indian way, or kind of even an anglicized way of speaking, but he was the first one to really use that kind of accent. That's what he gave to all of the not just ska, to reggae, is to sing or to speak vocals in your own voice, and that's what he really did. I find it actually kind of almost Shakespearean, the way he speaks. I love the way he pronounces words and the rhythmical way that he sings.
One of the songs that was most meaningful to me, and partially because it's such a spectacular song, 7 Wonders of the World. The instrumental that is this sort of like very Middle Eastern sounding, Far East minor key song.
1980s and early 90s, Prince Buster was already out of retirement and recording and performing again. Some of our guests were lucky enough to perform with Prince Buster, and of course, in the case of Sultan Ali, grew up with him.
Because see, we grew up in Western Kingston. I was born 28 Rose Lane. And like I said, we come from humble beginnings. Okay? And my father aspired coming from Western Kingston. Again, he questioned things. He saw the economical, social, and political divide, and he questioned things. And that taught him to let's listen, you got to venture for yourself. You got to go in business for yourself. You got to own your destiny. You got a right to self-determination. You know, and he started working with Duke Reed, producing songs. Matter of fact, one of the first 13 songs he did for Duke Reed included Let George Do It with the great Lester Sterling and Rico Rodriguez. A lot of people credited to Drum Beggar, but it's not Drum Beggar, to Don Drummond. It's not Don Drummond, it's Rico Rodriguez. Shake a Leg with Derek Morgan, Eric Montemoris, Money Can't Buy Life. He produced the first 13 songs because what he was really doing, he was trying to teach and show Duke Reed and Coxsone that we should create something that was Jamaican. By my walking around, going to school every day, my friends, when they found out who I was, I mean, there was always an awe. I had a group of friends around me. Buster's your father. So I know from a very, very, very early age that my father was something special in Kingston. And I can recall going to the bank, Barclays Bank back in the day to make a lodgement. And if we walk from the shop on Orange Street down to King Street, I mean, it took us forever. Why? Because every like 4, 5, 6 feet, there's somebody trying to garner his attention. Would that be the simple man on the street? Okay, the bus driver, the man on the bike, the cab driver, the cane cart man. Every time you walk, somebody trying to get his attention. Prince, Bob, Judge Dredd, hard man for that, you see? And by we walking from the shop, the working store, to the bank, it took us forever because everybody wanted a piece of him. Everybody wanted to garner his attention. So from a very early age, I knew that he was something special.
You know, during the two-tone time, you know, he's sort of an enigma. You know, like a lot of the other guys came to England and he didn't. You know, to kind of, you know, he could have really capitalized on it. I think he had a jukebox business in Miami. And I met him in Gaz's Rockin' Blues. There's this guy called Gaz Mail, who was really, you know, he was quite a good musician, Gaz, you know, and he's really good ska. And I met him and I just said, you know, did you get all the royalties? Obviously, because, you know, you wonder where they went, you know, and he did, you know, it was really cool. And he gave me his phone number on a cigarette packet, which I've got somewhere, you know, sort of treasured thing, you know. And then, but you know, we did God blimey, I don't know if it was Finsbury Park. And we got him on stage with us and we did Madness, you know. And he kind of, you know, we did it slightly different to his arrangement, you know, so he kind of told us off, you know. And the next night we did it, you know, yeah, because of the sax solo, do you know what I mean? And he went to sing and we were flipping. But yeah, you know, he's a pretty sort of cool guy, you know.
Okay, it's very simple. I did one concert and one album, but they were both incredible events for me. The concert was at the Sir George Robey in London, and I think it was one of the first, if not the first, concerts of his comeback from Jamaica when he'd. And I did this with a group, Big Five, which is Nick Welsh's group, King Hammond, known as. And we played that concert. It was the most exciting concert in my entire life. I can remember doing the intro to Gangsters, ding, 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 not to Gangsters, sorry, Al Capone. And just the excitement was unbelievable. It's like Prince Buster's back and I'm like standing next to him. So we did that concert, and we also recorded an album which has no name because it has never been released. And it doesn't have the group doesn't have a name. The group was myself, Nick Welsh, King Hammond, that is, Perry Melius, and Rico Rodriguez on trombone. At the time, we had been playing all together in Bad Manners. We were playing every night. You know, we were really, really, really tight. And our idea was to become a kind of house band like Motown or like Stax or something like that. You know, to have a band and play with or support different musicians. And so we made this album with Prince Buster. It was brilliant, and you know, Buster took the tape as it was away with him and back to Florida, and we've never heard any of it ever since. It was absolutely superb piece of music, which maybe nobody will ever hear. But,
too hot. This town is too hot. Too hot. Too hot. Now they're calling in for the guns. About to spoil the rude boy funds. But rude boy never give up their guns. It's too hot. Too hot. Too hot. No man can tell them what to do.
And those last two songs were, of course, Too Hot and Orange Street, Prince Buster classics, and famous to UK ska fans due to the specials having covered them. Now, throughout the podcast, we've tried to pop in a few songs here and there, all the ones you know and love, but there's still a few more to get to. One in particular, I feel needs a little more than just a nod, and it just happens to be my favorite Prince Buster song. It's Judge Dredd. Now, think back to 1967 and what popular music looked like and sounded like. At relatively the same time, the Beatles would be recording Sgt. Pepper's and Prince Buster would be recording Judge Dredd. Both would use the device of stepping out of their personal identities to assume a fictional role, or roles in the case of the Beatles. Now, neither was the first one to do this, but perhaps this was the first time in both circumstances where it was used to such great effect. In creating the Judge Dredd role, and by extension, the Barrister Pardon role, the Prince was able to make a play, literally, as well as commentary on the draconian Jamaican judicial system, which at that point was doling out extreme punishment as a way to rein in the literal rude boys. Discontented youth cast aside due to the ever-declining economy. Let's take a listen to Judge Dredd.
Order. Now my court is in session. Will you please stand? First, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Judge 100 Years. Some people call me Judge Dredd. Now, I am from Ethiopia. Try all you rude boys for shooting black people. In my court, only me talk, cause I'm Bex. And I am the rude boy today. Who gun case? Yes, sir.
So, Laurie, we're getting a little close to the end of the podcast, and we've really talked, or rather, maybe our guests have talked, about Prince Buster, his importance, his resonating with British youth, his influence on the ska scene to come. And this is also a little bit of an introduction for you to Prince Buster. So why don't you tell me what your thoughts are?
Yeah, no, a lot of this is very new to me. Obviously, he was very much a part of the UK music scene, not so much over here in the United States. And so it's very interesting to me to kind of see this commonality, this musical thread, where the inspiration came from for Madness, right? And, hearing Buster, he sold the heat, right? And now to kind of have a perspective, who is that? Who are they talking about? And then, of course, to hear some of the original tunes that they've covered. And it's fascinating to me, so this is an area that I'm really not too familiar with. What are your thoughts? I know you're more immersed in this musical culture than I am.
Well, and I think Stephen Shafer hit on this in some of his comments, but so I didn't come by being a Prince Buster fan that easily. I was, of course, originally a fan of UK ska, and absorbed that, listened to it, appreciated it, and in time, as one would, you want to ask the question: well, how did these guys get started? What was important to them? And of course, the song "The Prince," name dropping Prince Buster in so many of his songs, it makes me, and I'm supposing many other people, very very curious and wanting to learn about Prince Buster. And I did. And I listened to Prince Buster and, maybe put it away for a little while. It was later on in life when I had the resources to really dig up a lot of Prince Buster's music that it really kind of clicked with me at a certain point. And able to see, oh my God, here's the beat. That's the original. That's the originator. That is what was picked up by everybody else. It gave me a whole new appreciation for it. And I'd say, probably for the past 15 years, really, is when I've really gotten heavy into ska and started to, pursue it a little bit more from a educational standpoint, really trying to familiarize myself with it. And having done that, I'm a full-fledged fan. I really am.
And of course, 5 years ago, we lost Prince Buster. He suffered a series of strokes over the preceding years, and he was in poor health for a while. So the Prince finally succumbed to his illnesses on September 8th, 2016. We thought it would be nice if our guests offered some final words to Prince Buster.
If the Prince were here right now, what would you say to him?
If I were able to speak to the Prince, I would just want to thank him for sharing his music with us, and try to convey to him how incredibly meaningful it is. And I'm sure he knows this to some degree, but how incredibly meaningful it is to people all around the world, and how many people he's influenced. He's the greatest. I mean, just the absolute greatest.
I'd just say, Buster, thanks for your music and the flipping inspiration, for me and many others.
If he was here with us today, I would say we haven't caught up with you yet. Cecile, we have not caught up with you yet. We're getting there. We're getting there.
Love you. I am grateful, and I'm blessed because I didn't choose my father, and likewise, my father didn't choose me. It was a divine orchestration from the Most High, from the universal power that's unseen, but it's here. It's called the guide, the unseen force and power. So the universal order meant for Prince Buster Sessikam, the Mormon used to be my father, and for me to be his son. And both of us had no say in that. So there's a master orchestrator, so to speak. So I'm grateful and I'm thankful. Peace be unto you. Skelan.
That's just about it for our episode. We want to thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about Prince Buster.
Coming up in 2 weeks, we have another interview. Louis Vaz. So he is a very talented pianist and composer. He worked with Mark Bedford in Butterfield 8. He worked with Lee and Chris in Crunch, and of course the Lee Thompson Scott Orchestra. He has some really cool stories to tell. So we hope you'll tune in for that in 2 weeks. So we thought it would be appropriate to close with Madness's original single, The Prince, and we're going to let Chrissy Boy introduce it. And on that note, it's a goodbye from me.
And that's a goodbye from me. Go get a beer, Stateside Madness, for the Prince.
Of course, The Prince, you know, our first single was a tribute to Prince Buster. It was written by Lee. And, you know, it's kind of like, rips off that song Earthquake. Earthquake, ding, 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 you know, it's sort of like similar. And Lee, yeah, he kind of did this sax solo, and we're like, oh, wow, Tomo, you know. And then we realized he kind of nicked it off the Prince Buster song, but, you know, you have to find out what one that is. It's something to do with Texas.
Buster, he sold the heat with a rock steady beat.
An earthquake is erupting, but not in Orange Street. A ghost dance is preparing, you got to help us with your feet. If you're not in the mood to dance, step back, grab yourself a seat. This may not be uptown Jamaica, but we promise you a treat. Buster, throw me over with your bogus dance, shuffle me off my feet. Even though I'll keep on running, I'll never get to Orange Street. So I say there's not much left to say for the man who set the beat. So I'll leave it up to you out there to get him back on his feet. Buster, throw me over with your bogus dance, shuffle me off my feet. Even though I'll keep on running, I'll never get to Orange Street.